Chicago was supposed to be a victory lap. The 2026 WNBA All-Star Weekend was engineered to be a gleaming, perfectly packaged celebration of 3 decades of women's professional basketball. A billion-dollar showcase set against the backdrop of one of America's greatest sports cities, backed by a $2.2 billion television deal and more corporate money than the league had ever seen. The league's marketing machine was firing on all cylinders. The United Center was booked, the sponsors were locked in, the cameras were ready. What actually unfolded was something nobody in the front office saw coming. A weekend built to show the world that women's basketball had arrived, turned into one of the most chaotic, damaging, and genuinely revealing stretches in the league's 30-year history. Harassment cover-up allegations against a franchise, marquee stars publicly humiliating the league's event planning, a brutal on-court assault that drew congressional attention, a coach suspended for a racially charged comment, and the commissioner of the entire operation standing in front of reporters looking like someone had just handed her a lit stick of dynamite. The cracks didn't appear overnight. They'd been forming for years, hidden beneath the surface of soaring ratings and glitzy sponsor activations. But this All-Star Weekend was the moment everything came apart at once. And once you understand what actually happened, not the sanitized version, but the full, unfiltered story, the WNBA will never look quite the same to you again. It didn't begin with a press conference or a leaked memo. It started with a quote. Indiana Fever guard Sophie Cunningham sat down with ESPN for what was supposed to be a fairly standard feature profile on one of women's basketball's most colorful and recognizable personalities. Cunningham, the tall, fiercely competitive blonde who became a viral sensation earlier this season after pointing her finger directly at a rival player following an altercation with Caitlin Clark, is not someone who soft-pedals her opinions. She never has been. In that ESPN piece, Cunningham said she had received significant backlash for supposedly hating trans people. She pushed back on that characterization, but then she said what she actually believed, and it hit the internet like a match dropped in dry grass. I want to protect young girls in a locker room, or young girls in sport, who shouldn't have to go against biological males, she told the publication. There was no ambiguity in the statement, no careful hedging. She said what she meant. Before the ink was even dry on that article, the reaction was volcanic. Some corners of the internet immediately rallied behind her, calling her a hero for speaking up where others had stayed silent. Others called her blatantly transphobic. She was nicknamed MAGA Barbie on social media, a label that spread rapidly through sports circles. The White House got involved. Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt said publicly that President Trump agreed with Cunningham's position and that it was completely ludicrous that anyone could support biological males competing in women's sports. Suddenly, a reserve player averaging 9.3 points off the bench had become the most talked-about figure in professional sports. Cunningham's response to all of it? She didn't flinch. When reporters pressed her at a pregame shoot-around the following day, she doubled down without hesitation. I said what I said. I think it's kind of common sense. I think I'll always believe in that. She described her stance as coming from a place of love. I am here to extend love, but with that love comes truth, and made it clear she wasn't going to let public pressure reshape her convictions. I beat to my own drum. I'm confident in who I am, I'm proud of who I am, and I'm happy being me. She even acknowledged, almost with a shrug, that she knew the hate was coming. You could win the championship, you could be the best at whatever it is, and there's still people who are going to hate on you. For Cunningham, that reality was just the cost of being honest. But what she may not have anticipated was who was going to step forward next and just how far the fallout was about to travel. Brianna Turner had been watching the debate unfold with a specific kind of frustration. Turner, a veteran forward who spent the 2025 season with the Indiana Fever before signing with the Las Vegas Aces, had an angle on this story that nobody else did. And when Cunningham's comments about protecting women's spaces started dominating every sports conversation in the country, Turner decided she was done staying quiet. Late one evening, she pulled out her phone and posted a series of tweets to X that stopped the WNBA world cold.
Turner pointed out, calmly, deliberately, that in her 8th WNBA season, there had been exactly one openly trans player in the league's history, and that player had caused 0 problems. But then she pivoted to something she had personal knowledge of, what actually went on inside the Indiana Fever organization during the 2025 season.
According to Turner, a male staffer employed by the Indiana Fever was fired last season for sexual harassment. That part alone would have been significant, but what made the allegation truly explosive was what she claimed came next. The players, Turner and her teammates, were actively encouraged by the organization to keep quiet about it. "That is an issue," she wrote plainly. "Sexism, misogyny, homophobia, and racism are all issues." The implication was clear. While Cunningham and others were publicly debating a theoretical threat to women's safety, Turner was saying there had been a very real, documented instance of misconduct inside their own locker room, and when it happened, the organization's response had been to manage the story rather than protect the players. Reports later filled in some of the details surrounding the incident. The comment made by the staffer in question was described as vulgar and disrespectful, and he was reportedly fired the same day the conduct came to light. As for whether a police report was ever filed, that remains unclear, but none of that addresses the core of Turner's allegation, that the players were pushed to stay silent. The Indiana Fever's response when contacted by media was precisely the kind of statement that only makes things worse. They said that protecting players and employees and maintaining a respectful workplace was their top priority. They said they take concerns seriously and investigate thoroughly, and then they said they do not comment on personnel matters involving former employees, neatly ensuring they could acknowledge nothing specific. It was textbook damage control, and it landed with all the warmth of a form letter from an insurance company. Several players around the league who had been hesitant to speak out publicly took notice of the Fever's refusal to engage with the substance of Turner's claims. The silence from the front office spoke volumes. What Turner had done, deliberately or not, was blow open a conversation the league desperately did not want to have during its biggest showcase weekend of the year. The conversation about how women's basketball organizations handle misconduct when the cameras aren't rolling. If the Turner-Cunningham Fever storyline was a grenade, what happened with the three-point contest was a slow-motion disaster of a different kind. All-Star Friday Night was supposed to be the league's entertainment showcase, a glitzy event at Wintrust Arena, with the league's most electric shooters competing under the lights for what was expected to be a massive television audience. The problem? The league's 3 most obvious participants were all absent. Caitlin Clark, the most recognizable player in women's basketball history, the woman who has been the single greatest driver of the league's current commercial explosion, was not in the building as a competitor. Neither was Sabrina Ionescu, the reigning champion who holds the highest single-round score in the history of both the WNBA and NBA three-point contests at 37 points. And Kayla McBride, the active leader in career three-pointers made in the entire league, with 793, was also nowhere to be found. Now, there are different stories about exactly why each of them wasn't there. Clark has declined the contest invite in every season she has been eligible, which at this point has become its own storyline and not a flattering one for the league. She was set to participate in 2025 before a groin injury sidelined her for the entire All-Star break, but she had skipped 2024 as well. Ionescu's situation was more pointed. She publicly stated she was never officially invited at all. And McBride? McBride went on Instagram and told the world exactly what she thought of the league's outreach. She revealed that she had received a text message sent through her agent, arriving a mere 48 hours before the event was scheduled to take place. She called it a half-assed invite. She made absolutely clear this wasn't about being afraid of competition. McBride is a 5-time All-Star who has competed in 3 previous three-point contests. This was about basic professional respect. The active leader in WNBA three-pointers deserved more than a last-minute text fired through a middleman.
She told her followers not to believe any post claiming she had declined. She hadn't declined an official invitation because in her telling, she had never received one. Think about what this looks like from the outside. A league flush with $2.2 billion in television money, celebrating its 30th anniversary, putting on what it billed as its premier Friday night entertainment showcase, and it couldn't get its three most compelling competitors into the building because its own event planning was this disorganized. The contest that did take place featured talented players, including rookie sensation Azzi Fudd and sharpshooter Marina Mabrey, but broadcast executives who had been counting on Clark's global profile to drive viewership were left staring at a very uncomfortable reality. The league's biggest draws had all found reasons not to show up, and at least one of them had loudly and publicly explained why. The three-point contest mess was embarrassing, but the officiating crisis heading into All-Star Weekend was something more serious, something that had been festering all season and had finally erupted in a way the league could no longer contain.
The single most defining incident of the 2026 WNBA season took place on June 24 during an Indiana Fever game against the Phoenix Mercury. In a loose ball scramble, Mercury forward Alyssa Thomas made contact with Caitlin Clark's throat, closed fist, throat area. On camera, in slow motion, it looked exactly as bad as it sounds. The officials who were on the floor reviewed the play in real time and declined to call it a flagrant foul. The game went on. Phoenix won by 2. The league office reviewed the footage the following day and came to a completely different conclusion. Thomas was upgraded to a flagrant 2 foul, suspended for 1 game, and fined $1,000. Clark made it absolutely clear she thought the officials had gotten it badly wrong the first time. Her coach, Stephanie White, had already gone nuclear in the post-game press conference the night of the incident. "The fist on the throat, it's crazy, it's dangerous," White said. This was not the first time White had gone after the officiating crew publicly. She had called WNBA refereeing egregious earlier in the same season, saying, "The disrespect right now for our team has been pretty unbelievable." Members of Congress sent a formal letter to Commissioner Kathy Engelbert, urging the league to do a better job protecting Clark and improving player safety. Not exactly a routine piece of correspondence for a basketball league. Then there was Alyssa Thomas's response to all of it, which added yet another painful layer to an already complicated situation. Thomas and her family began receiving death threats in the aftermath. She was subjected to racial slurs online, and Thomas called Engelbert directly, pointing out that the league had been loudly concerned about safety on the court while failing to protect her and other black players from online harassment and real-world threats. "There's a difference between trolling and hatred," Thomas said. "We're having people threatening our lives." The league's handling of both the on-court incident and the wave of harassment it triggered left almost nobody satisfied. Just weeks later, Toronto Tempo head coach Sandy Brondello became the next name in the officiating controversy file, when she was suspended for 1 game after being caught on broadcast referring to Angel Reese as a protected species following a foul call. The phrase, common in Australian sports as an expression of frustration over a player getting favorable calls, landed in an American context with devastating effect. The racial undertones were impossible to ignore, and the WNBA moved swiftly. But by that point, the league's reputation for handling controversy cleanly had already taken significant damage. While all of this was exploding across the national sports landscape, there was a quieter but equally revealing story playing out about the choice of Chicago itself as the host city. It was, to put it diplomatically, a head-scratching selection, and not because of anything wrong with Chicago as a sports city. The problem was the Chicago Sky organization, whose dysfunction has become one of the worst-kept secrets in women's basketball.
It was widely acknowledged as something of a stunner when Chicago was originally awarded hosting duties. The Sky have a well-documented history of operational instability, internal complaints, and losing star talent, not through trades or gradual rebuilding, but through players forcing their way out because they don't want to be there. The most recent and most high-profile example was Angel Reese, who made clear she wanted out and was eventually moved to the Atlanta Dream. Reese returned to Chicago for All-Star Weekend as a Dream representative, essentially coming back to a city whose organization she had fled. The visual alone was striking, but there was an even more pointed detail buried in the lead-up to the weekend. The Chicago Sky organization had still not moved into a permanent practice facility. As of the 2026 All-Star break, the team may not secure one until 2027 at the earliest. For a league aggressively marketing itself as a billion-dollar enterprise, the host city's franchise not having a practice facility is the kind of operational detail that doesn't exactly project stability. And Chicago became the first host city in All-Star Weekend history that did not have a single player selected to the All-Star game, a distinction that lands with a very specific kind of sting when you're trying to sell the world on your league's prestige. Everything that happened this weekend, the harassment allegations, the contest snubs, the officiating chaos, the host city embarrassment, pointed to a single underlying reality that the players themselves have been articulating with increasing clarity. The WNBA's commercial value has exploded, but the way the league actually treats their players has not kept pace. Ahead of the All-Star game, the WNBA Players Association's Executive Committee sat down with league leadership for what was described as a temperature check, a meeting that covered everything that had happened through the first half of the season. The league has a $2.2 billion television deal. Sponsors are spending more on women's basketball than at any point in history. Viewership numbers have climbed dramatically. The WNBA All-Star Game, as it turned out, actually edged out the 2026 NBA All-Star Game in at least one key viewership metric, proof that the product, when given a proper stage, can compete at an elite level.
But the players sitting in those locker rooms are watching cover-ups get swept under the rug. They're watching stars get punched in the throat while officials look the other way. They're watching themselves get invited to marquee events through text messages sent to their agents 48 hours before showtime. The gap between the league's billion-dollar ambitions and the day-to-day reality of playing in it has become impossible to paper over. Caitlin Clark, for her part, had been speaking about the officiating problem for months before All-Star Weekend. "It's kind of been a discussion for 3 years now," she said at one point, "and I think we really need to do a better job protecting the people in this league." That wasn't a player venting after a bad game. That was the league's most bankable asset issuing what amounted to a public warning. And when the players collectively refused to populate the three-point contest, when Turner went public with the fever allegations, when McBride embarrassed the league's event management on Instagram, they were all sending the same message: we know what we're worth, and we're done pretending otherwise. On Saturday evening at the United Center, the basketball itself was actually something to appreciate. Jonquel Jones walked away as the All-Star Game MVP in a well-played showcase. Paige Beckers looked every bit like the next superstar heir apparent. The fans who showed up were loud and engaged, and in one of the weekend's genuinely moving moments, a surprise guest walked onto the court at the Obama Presidential Center during a players' practice session. Former President Barack Obama himself, who the players didn't know was coming until he appeared in front of them. The room erupted. It was, for a moment, everything All-Star Weekend is supposed to be. But the basketball and the moments of joy existed alongside everything else. The allegations, the snubs, the suspension, the controversy, the dysfunction. And Kathy Engelbert will now spend the weeks following All-Star Weekend trying to navigate a series of fires that are burning in very different directions simultaneously. The core challenge is one that no amount of PR management can fully solve. The league has built its latest growth surge on the backs of a generation of players who are more educated, more connected, more publicly empowered, and more financially secure than any generation before them. These women are not going to quietly absorb misconduct, disrespect, or institutional failures the way previous generations had to. They have platforms, they have leverage, and as this All-Star Weekend demonstrated with brutal clarity, they are absolutely willing to use both. The question isn't really whether the WNBA can recover from this weekend. The league's underlying commercial momentum is real, and the sport's best moments, when it gets out of its own way, are genuinely remarkable. The question is whether the administration has the self-awareness and the will to meet this generation of players where they actually are, rather than where it would prefer them to be. Kathy Engelbert and her team have a choice to make. They can treat what happened in Chicago as a collection of isolated controversies to be managed and minimized, which is exactly what they have been doing for years. Or they can treat it as the clearest possible signal that the era of keeping players quiet, cutting corners on basic professional courtesies, and protecting institutions over individuals is permanently, irreversibly over. The players have already decided. The only question left is whether the people running the league are listening. Drop your thoughts below. Do you think the WNBA front office will actually change anything after this, or will we be having this same conversation next All-Star Weekend? Hit the like button if you want more breakdowns like this, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, and ring the bell because this story is nowhere near finished.